So we got the valve body here. This is for all the hydraulic controls in the machine. It's got a few crispy hoses that will be replaced, a few hard lines. I did take the handles off, so we've got all the links for that. I was measuring bushings really quick. So we're going to take the rest of these fittings off of here and reseal the whole valve and put fresh boss O-rings on all these. And we're going to start off by just stripping all this stuff down. I'll put it in this basket and I'll go put through the parts washer, and that way it'll be ready to come back through again. So, start by just taking this all apart. You might think these are in there pretty good. These are all Boss O-ring. They are worth taking out. They'll probably be all crispy when I take them off. Right now, that's not a big deal to pull out of there. You can see these O-rings are rock solid. That's not going to last. It's pretty common to have a Boss O-ring in your housing for pumps and valves and all sorts of stuff. They're in the transmission housing going to JIC. JIC is very standard and great fitting. It's a 37-degree flare. There is, you gotta be careful, a 45-degree fitting as well, which looks pretty darn similar, but it won't work. Yeah, these would be nice to get all cleaned up. They're pretty gross. Solvent tank will take care of that though. So our top's out of there. And now we got a couple plugs. We've got the back caps. I'm going to crack all this loose and then I'll take it off the base plate and then we'll take the ends off. It's just easy while it's all connected. It's pretty solid. Easy to work with. Oh, that was finger tight anyway. These are all dirty inside. You can pull the spool out. Now you do want to keep these spools in the correct housing. They're mated. You don't want to swap them around. Like I wouldn't want to switch this one and this one. That's just not a good idea. A little wear, but I don't see any big scoring. We'll have to look in the housing. So I'm going to keep these in order. I'm going to put them on a rag over out of the way here. I don't really care about keeping the end caps in order, but the valves themselves. It's got a little scoring, but not too bad. I think this will still work. Fresh O-rings will be good for a while. This is a totally different valve section too for the winch. There's no ring. These O-rings are all flattened out. This one looks like it's in pretty good shape. I'm sure the steering one's probably the worst. Just because that'd get used more than anything, and probably the blade and then the winch. Use it a lot, but it's not all the time every run. We got a couple caps. We'll take it off the base plate. These are your cartridges. You don't want to switch these around either. These are going to be your pressure reliefs. These are non-adjustable. You got to adjust these usually with shims. I'm just going to thread these in real light. This one's got a bunch of junk in it too. Yeah, that might have just fallen when we opened it up. The rest of it's pretty clean. The screen looks pretty good. This is going to be your main system relief to set the pressure on everything. And this, the winch has its own set of reliefs. But I'm going to leave these just sitting loose, and then when I go to the parts washer, I'll take one section at a time over there, and that way I won't get anything mixed up. Yeah, this is all O-rings in there, so that'll seal up nicely. There's even, see, there's a part number on the end. Can't read it. I will be able to when I clean it though. Not put them in my solvent. Most valves that are sectional, they're either a one-piece casting, or if they're like this one and they're multiple pieces, they've got either bolts or threaded rod running right through them. That's how they all connect together. So you just take these out. Try to keep the washers with them. Those will go get washed up. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a tap. You can pop these apart. And you look in here. Spacings are pretty good, but O-ring. There's O-rings all the way around. There's even some on the bolt holes here. So we can. I'm going to pop these out. I'm going to stick them all in a rag because I'll lose them in the parts washer, and this will make it easy to make sure I got the right ones. These are pretty flat, but I think they're just supposed to be O-rings. I'll look into it. If they have to be a special seal, I can get them. I'm pretty sure these are just really old O-rings, though. You don't want to reuse them, though. They will leak on you. They should be the same all the way down through for whichever brand of valve you have. But the holes will stay the same, the O-ring should stay the same. I'm going to line these up with the spools so I don't get them mixed up. I'll just set this stuff together. And I'll wash them one at a time. So that way I don't get them mixed up. Get this bolt out, that'll help. Just come right apart. Just the middle spool. There was one in there. That one broke coming out. They're getting too old. It's not just that I poke at it, it would have broken on me in the woods. Pop this apart. When you're picking these out, you actually want to drive the pick into the O-ring. You don't want to scratch the housing. You're replacing the O-ring, you don't want to be replacing the housing. So these will all go through the parts washer, and I'll bring you back when they're clean and we'll put it all back together. Like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you need, what you think, what you want. Alright, so all this stuff has gone through the parts washer and we're ready to put it all back together. So, I got you a pie, seems to be the best way to look at what I'm doing. Otherwise, I'm in the way all the time. So I got it all laid out. This valve with this spool, here's one end plates with its relief, valve, spool, end plate, no relief. Same thing here with multiple reliefs. I got all the plugs from the top. These are all cleaned. The boss O-rings have all been changed, so those are good. So basically now we have to look into these bodies. I popped this one free. There's O-rings in these grooves here, so we got to change these O-rings out, put our reliefs back, change the O-rings on the spools, put the spools in, put the caps in, line these all up on the bolts, and that's kind of the rebuild. So I'm going to go into my O-ring kit here. I'm going to find the correct one. Looks like probably might be a 124 maybe. Yeah, so it's 568 124. Throw the old ones out. They still look sort of okay. You don't want to put them in something though. If they don't work right, I mean, O-rings are so cheap, you don't want to reuse them. Unless you absolutely have to. So fresh O-ring in there. Just do all the sections at once while we're at it, since we figured out the size for it. It's pretty easy to do. And do stab the O-ring when you're in there. You don't want to try to save the O-ring and scratch your port, because that can leak. It's just good practice to just grab the O-ring itself. And this side doesn't have any because that's the O-ring that's on the unit itself. That one's already out. Must have fallen out cleaning or broken, or might have just been leaking really bad. Don't think I pulled that one though. Okay, so those O-rings are changed. So while we're changing O-rings in the spools, there's an O-ring still stuck on the spools. You got to work it off. These are pretty sharp. Carefully don't cut your fingers. They're really ground pretty precisely. It can be sharp. And it's not the same size. We got to go down a size. This one looks like it's a 123, so 568-120-123 size O-ring. These we will slide right on up. Be careful not to cut it. Work it over that. Work it over this. Work it over this. And finally up onto here. Make sure it's not twisted. They can, a rolled O-ring will leak. Seems odd, but it will. And you'll note I have some nice clean cardboard down here. That's a good little trick, or I guess hack as everybody's calling it these days. I'm not really into that, but whatever. It's a good way to get your bench real clean real quick. Just shipping box and cut down and lay down. It's a nice surface. You can see everything too. Not a bad backdrop for the camera either. I'll hold this one up while I do it. Just working the O-ring carefully over each section of the spool. Trying not to cut it. You can roll them, but just make sure when you're at your final spot, it's not rolled or twisted. Yeah, same thing. You can also cut these off if you want. Just take a pair of snippers and cut them. I'm just double checking because like right there, I just grabbed the wrong size. It's easy to do. Got the right one. Always come out with the right O-ring in the end. You do want to look at your spools. You can see there's a little bit of wear, but there's nothing really too bad on these. Nothing I'm really concerned about not sealing. You want to look and make sure they're not scored up. Like this one's got a few marks in it. It's not great, but I think it'll be okay. It's not bad enough for me to want to replace. This one's got a little bit of wear, but there's no deep, sharp gouges. Just some sort of smoother wear pattern on it. Should be okay. Now, I'm going to stick the reliefs in. Make sure you get them in the right spot. Like this one here is a 450 psi, whereas this one's a 550 psi. So really keep this stuff straight when you're going through. You can really have it not operate right if you have the wrong one. And then this other relief here is actually a 1750 psi. So as you can imagine, this one sets the pressure for all the sections. And this is the winch spool. This one sets the pressure for, I think it's the brake and the release. So if you mix up these two, it'd probably still work, but it'd probably be pretty weird. Might not work quite right, or it might be dragging. You mix up this one and one of those, and you're not going to have pressure for anything, and whichever function got this plug would be reducing further than the whole valve is, and it wouldn't work at all. So really make sure, and you do want to really get these clean. I already went through and cleaned these off camera. It took a little bit of time to make sure it was right. I wasn't sure you guys wanted to watch that. And I'm just threading them in quick. I'll tighten all that stuff when it's all together because the big block's easier to hang on to. You really don't want to clamp on any of these faces. These are machined faces and they have to seal, so keep it nice. And now, to assemble it all, you can either dip them in oil, or I'm just going to use this little assembly grease. But you want something to lubricate these spools and O-rings when they go together. I'm coming in, I'm going to get this O-ring up front. And these, 'cause that's certainly easy enough to cut. And I'm just going to go and coat up all the high points on here. On this O-ring back here, just to try to make it go together a little smoother. Then slide it in. You want to make sure the handle end's clean because that goes through the valve. It goes for taking it apart too. You don't want to drag a whole bunch of crud down through there. It should slide right in like that. I'll do this next one up by the camera for you. Make sure it's lubed, get some on that O-ring so it seats in nice. And this is an oil soluble grease, so it's not going to make a mess. So on this section, starting, this is the back of the valve. Just get it in there careful. Slide it, you can wiggle a little if you need. Get to there and I'm up to the O-rings. Little click and it's in. Now that's ready to go. Last one in, and this procedure, this is a Cessna valve, but most valves you get that are sectional will work exactly the same way. You'll see minor differences, like some of them have a square profile seal instead of an O-ring. There's a couple brands that will actually use a oil seal around the end as opposed to just an O-ring, but you can use exactly what I'm showing you to do all of that. The only difference would be if you have a oil seal, you gotta pop it out and tap one in flush, and if you got a square seal instead, then you'll just have to get a different seal, but it goes together exactly the same way. And I will say, these O-rings that came out look square, but they're just O-rings. They've been sitting in that bore for so long, they look flat. So we will start initially with our end cap. And we're going to slide the bolts up through it. These two are the bottom. Stand it up so we can stack on it. Then we're just going to take a little dab of grease for the O-rings, just to make sure they sit there right. And we're going to go into my other case of O-rings here and find the sizes. I think looks like maybe one of these guys. Yeah. So these guys go down around the bolts. That's a 568019 O-ring. And then next, oh, we actually have a couple sizes here. Next one will be this little guy, which is a 568020. And this guy, and clean one of these. Yep, that's it. 568023 O-ring. These. Our big guy. It's a 568028. So make sure they're all down in there, in their grooves. They're not going to pop up on us. They're not going to get pinched. They got to be in pull-up position, so they don't end up all pinched when the sections go together. You gotta get a little grease on these to make sure they stay. Because if they're half out of their holes when you put it together, they will get cut. That's not what you want to have happen. Alright. Then, our next section. And if you're ever wondering, all these sections have one flat face. Then there's no milling around the ports. And the other side has the milling. You're never going to put two sets of O-rings together and two flats together. So O-rings here, so flats here. You can just check the O-rings again, and then you can throw these couple top ones in. Since these guys are sort of tricky once it's in place. Drop that down. And then finish putting our O-rings in. Use that guy. Yep. I think these. Yep, that'll work. See how good my memory is if I grab the right O-rings or not. There we go. I'm doing pretty well. I'm grabbing from the right spot. And this is our winch section. Just keep stacking our steering and our blade sections on there. I know this job looks sort of scary when you think about it, or when you look at it, but it's not too bad once you get into it. And this isn't a half done job or anything. This is how to do it. How a hydraulic shop will actually do it for you if you take it there. I'm just showing you can do it yourself. I mean, as a hydraulic shop, I'd love you to bring stuff to me, but realistically, most people watching on YouTube probably aren't going to drive all the way over here and drop their stuff off. So. And it's nice to have the O-ring selection actually do it. There's a lot of odds and ends to doing this. So you can see this end. These two holes are actually threaded, so these bolts will go into them. And probably should have used an alignment pin instead. And this bolt can drop through top here. Light tap. And then I'm going to gently tip this on its side. I guess it'd be tipping it the right way. And then tap that through and get the nut started. Slide these in, get these started. You don't need to go nuts on this stuff either. Really not going crazy tight with my impact here because I don't want to damage anything. And you just don't need to go that crazy tight on these. Into this bolt head is a little dinged up, so difficult for a socket, but it's not going to affect the performance of it. Okay, now our valve sections are back together, so we can finish closing it all up. So if you go to the back here, we got these caps. These are all cleaned out. There is no seal. There's also a hole in the end, just to vent it. These are sealed by that O-ring we put on the spool itself. So thread these on there. And this one, thread this one down too. You don't have to go crazy on these. Just tighten them up, they don't leave. By leave, I mean fall off. They aren't going to run away or something. This one gets a big wrench. So that's on there. One thing I'll mention, before you tighten down your reliefs, if you look, outside of the relief is sealed with Boss O-ring. Inside, there's another spot for an O-ring. That O-ring's in this housing. So you want to reach in with your pick and pop it out. I popped this one out already so I could measure it up. It's a 568-025. Actually a 125. And then you want to reach up into the housing and get this in that groove. And it's in a little ways. And it can be a little tricky to do. Especially if you have fat fingers like I do. There is a backup ring in there too, which I'm fighting with. Got it started. Reach in the handy dandy O-ring tool. It's not a pick, it's not sharp. This is a snap-on one. You can. For years I used one made out of a screwdriver that I just ground and sanded so it wasn't sharp at all. It worked pretty well. I saw a set of these and I was like, ooh, I gotta have that. That's how those guys make their money. Showing up with stuff that you don't know why you bought it, but it's darn nice to have. Alright, so that's in there. Now, I guess we might as well do the other ones before we get greasy. Reach in, I'm just going to stab just the O-ring. Pull it on out of there. They're kind of square in profile because they're old. Doesn't mean it's a square O-ring, it just means it's been in there for a long time. It probably won't seal very well. You can reuse backup rings if they look okay. These seem to be okay. O-rings, don't reuse them. I swear I wish I had an apprentice with little hands. Three of them in there. Okay, now that those are in there, put a little grease on them and stuff these babies in. A little grease just so it don't cut them. Everything slides. Might as well put a little on here too. There we go. You want to make sure you do all the O-rings when you do a valve. Otherwise you only half did it. And you can have bigger problems, in my experience, just because I'll assume it's not the valve because I just did it. But turns out it's, you know, the one seal you didn't do is acting up, and now you got odd problem in your system, but you've already assumed you took care of that problem. So do yourself a favor and change all the O-rings when you change the O-rings. Every last one of them. The ones inside, the ones on the fittings, everywhere. Plus, if you're getting paid to do it, last thing you want is to have a call back. Not over a couple O-rings. We got our grease on there. Slide these in there. Remember, like this is one I just did. I can get to focus. See, that's a brand new O-ring, but it didn't feel right going in. It's cut. Don't use it. Throw it away. It's garbage. Just because it's brand new doesn't mean it's still any good. You broke it. Broke it. Gotta get another one. Now, we'll put our adapter plugs back in. If you're thinking about skimping out, not taking these out, two things to think of. This Boss O-ring, they can fail. Other thing to consider is the gap between here and the valve. It's a nice dead spot. It's an easy spot to get a lot of junk collecting. Especially if you're cleaning them out. Good spot to find junk. You want to take them out and make sure you get the junk out of there. What's the point of doing a system clean out and resealing it only to leave a whole bunch of stuff in that little backwater? That's where the junk can collect pretty easily. Any little backwater spot. You don't have to go crazy on these. The O-ring's what's sealing it. And until we figure out our final plumbing with new hoses, and I'm changing up the coolers on the system and a few other things in plumbing, I'll leave these two just loose so I don't screw anything up.